Welcome back. So South Africa's uncertainty with regards to coalition talks and the formation of a government of national unity has many of us wondering how political parties are going to navigate the negotiations. You know, the government of national unities, of course, are not new on the continent. Professor Peter Kagwanja, a Kenyan intellectual and policy thinker on African affairs, this morning takes us through Kenya's journey through a government of national unity and lessons that we can learn from our African counterparts. Prof, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think that I don't want to take for granted and assume that South Africans know what the the government of national unity looked like in Kenya, but perhaps bring us up to speed how it came about and certainly whether or not it was a successful project for Kenya.
Well, the government of national unity in Kenya started a whole process of coalition negotiations and coalition building. Of course, Kenya is slightly different from South Africa because South Africa is a parliamentary system where coalitions are natural processes. But in Kenya, we have a presidential system. And coalition building is usually post-election. I mean, after the election, that's when you form coalitions. Now, in 2008, we had violence, and we found that the only way to find peace and to give ourselves time to rebuild our country was to bring rival parties under one roof. And we brought the party of the time, Orange Democratic Movement, and the ruling party, the Party of National Unity of Mwai Kibaki. We put them together, and then we had what we call a grand coalition. And it's that grand coalition that we undertook a lot of reforms, including coming up with a new constitution. So depending on how they are managed, coalition governments are the best for reforms. Yeah, now, after 2017, we also had some little problems. We had what we call now the handshake. The handshake is an understanding between rival parties. One of President Uhuru Kenyatta and the opposition leader Raila Odinga. So we had a coalition that took us up to around 2022. So that's where we are up to now. And President William Ruto, who came in 2022, also has a very informal, extremely informal handshake with the opposition leader, Raila Odinga. But this time round, it is not as formal as that one of Kibaki and Odinga. Yeah. So Kenya is really used to coalition building.
Yeah, it was called the Grand Coalition Cabinet between 2008 and 2013. And the reason why I want to bring that up is because there's a sense in South Africa that when you talk coalitions, you're not talking about a government of national unity. There's the sense that, well, the ruling party in South Africa needs to either choose whether it's working with one party or the other and forming a coalition, and that a government of national unity is a more broader agreement of political parties. How do you understand that?
Yes, there's a difference between a government of national unity and a coalition government. Under this order, I think, looking at the situation in which the ANC finds itself, it has four options, which are very clear. It can take its old rivals within the ANC, that is Umkhonto we Sizwe and EFF, and then they can form a government. So they just need to talk as splinter parties, and therefore ANC come back. The other one is to take a bold step and have the Democratic Alliance and the ANC coming together. That's really bold, and that is what we call a government of national unity, meaning you'd have to bring other parties. But the situation in South Africa is not a conflictual situation. There's no conflict that needs to be ended. If you recall, South Africa's greatest legacy to the rest of the continent is actually the government of national unity, the one between the apartheid regime and the ANC, or the liberation movement. And the kind of a grand coalition government means that rivals ignore their differences and put the nation forward, and then agreed on specific trajectories of reform. And through that, then the national unity must have a purpose. In this particular case, I don't know what exactly the purpose would be in South Africa because there's no conflict. But what I think has started in South Africa, and I don't see it ending, is a continuous process of coalition building. So that is, I think, to talk about, I think when somebody talks about national unity, they are finding a reason to work with the opposition as we know it. And the opposition here, in the hard sense of the term, is the Democratic Alliance.
Right.
Because it's the one that has been in opposition for the last 5 elections.
Yes. And
therefore, when you talk about EFF or MK, that would not be a coalition for it, because these are split up or breakaway parties from it, and therefore it is basically making peace with the good old friends who are turned into enemies.
Yeah.
But for now, but if you go straight for, let's say, the National Alliance, a Democratic Alliance, and you forge a unity with the Democratic Alliance, then this is a big issue.
But how was Kenya able to grapple with this particular question? Because, of course, you mentioned how with Kenya, obviously, before this government of national unity, this grand coalition cabinet took place in 2008, there was the conflict, right, and the violence in the country, and you say not necessarily the case for South Africa. But what you do have in South Africa is also the legacy of apartheid, and there's a sense from many South Africans that the ANC working with a party like the Democratic Alliances, some would say a betrayal, right? That is, the Democratic Alliance is seen largely as a white party, and I say seen with very careful words there. And the ANC having been a liberation movement that took governance of the country in 1994. How was it that followers of parties in Kenya were able to reconcile with, the differences there and accept the government of national unity? I suppose, what should the parties do to bring people to the table? And I'm saying the citizens, that is.
I don't think there was any agreement, Narendi. The truth of the matter is that all handshakes or coalitions have been opposed by rival elites, and it is true. The handshake between Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta is the one that produced William Ruto as the opposition. So we have this mongrel of politics in Kenya, where a deputy president in a country would at the same time be the main opposition leader, because the government of national unity or coalition government has brought two enemies together, and therefore tampered with the succession, logic of the ruling party. Yeah. And therefore, when Raila Odinga, had a handshake with Uhuru Kenyatta, the truth of the matter is that Ruto felt marginalized. And he felt, because Raila will also be running for the 2022 elections, then he is beginning to give himself a hand start. And therefore is stealing the thunder from him, because he's the one who fought for the victory of the party. And the result is that Ruto became the de facto opposition leader. And the same can be said of Raila and Kibaki. When Kibaki and Raila went to had the Grand Coalition government, it is Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto and others who went straight into the opposition, because they thought that Odinga was being given an advantage over them. Yeah. And therefore, he decided to go to the trenches and prepare for the coming election, and therefore win election and defeat Raila. Now, what that in short means is that the moment you have the coalition government or the governments of national unity, you enter into a vicious cycle of what you call permanent campaigns or perpetual campaigns, meaning from day one, when the coalition is formed, another coalition is formed and goes to the trenches to try to dethrone the ruling coalition in the next election. Yeah. So it's a vicious cycle in which the priorities of the country can be lost. Right. For example, you can lose the priority that in South Africa, you need to empower and create opportunities for the black population, so that they can also begin to enjoy life like everybody else. But when you enter into the era of politicking, the vicious cycle of permanent or perpetual campaigns, then politics take the better of the country, and development is forgotten.
Ah, that's a very interesting perspective. Let me step in here, Prof. Yeah, I want to step in. I'll let you finish that thought quickly. Go ahead, Prof. I just want to bring in one last question. I'll let you finish that thought.
Yes, so South Africa need to guard against its own agenda, because what has happened is that ANC will now abandon its larger mandate of transforming South Africa into an equitable and well-shared society, and will now be fighting for its own life. And that's what Ramaphosa seems to be saying. Guard coalition, guard unity and all this. It is simply, you cannot hold together as yourself. You need a certain majoritarian mandate in order to be able to execute some of the unpalatable programs.
Right. Let me ask you this. Apologies. I'm in the interest of time here, Prof, so I need to move quite quickly. And I think it's really interesting what you say around guarding against the cycle of campaigning and then the development of people sitting in the back burner. And I think that that's essentially what the electorate wants to see, development. But then now that we sit here at the point of power sharing, I mean, here we are, essentially, you've got three arms of state, legislature, which is parliament, executive, which is cabinet. Those two arms of state certainly up for grabs for these political parties. When we power share, is it important to differentiate where the power lies in each of those arms of state?
No, not necessarily. What happens is that people are appointed with some kind of consensus in a number of ways. And in many cases, if it is an antagonistic coalition, then there is no agreement or consensus around individuals. So it's more of a tussle. I welcoming South Africa to a very rough patch in your politics, where conflict is more permanent than harmony, if I may put it that way, where the political elite are on a day-to-day basis waking up and making statements, waking up and busting others, rather than the calmness of what you have, the orderly parliamentary politics.
Right.
In coalition, they are very different. Two, coalitions can break in the middle of the government. So maybe the next election is supposed to take place in 2029 or something like that.
2029.
And then you have, before 2029, you may have about 3 more elections, because coalitions are broken down. The coalition partners have fallen apart. So then, therefore, the dominant party cannot rule without another coalition. So coalition after coalition, which is not very healthy. But in Kenya, because of the constitution itself says that the government that has entered, gotten into power, must go through to the whole, 5 years, then that has cushioned us against, governments corrupting and being succeeded by others.
Yeah.